It was a day at the View Studios in New York City. Joy Behar got there early, a cup of coffee in her hand, scrolling through her notes for the main interview of the day. Denzel Washington was set to appear on the broadcast to talk about his newest directing effort, a movie that was already making waves across the nation for its direct and honest look at systemic problems in the United States. Joy had done her research, or at least she thought so, and was prepared to make this interview something everyone would remember. "Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to The View," Joy announced to the live studio audience, her familiar smile shining on her face. "We have a very special person joining us today. He's a two-time Academy Award winner, a director, a producer, and someone who has never been scared to openly discuss the issues that matter most in our society. Please give a warm welcome to the legendary Denzel Washington." The audience clapped loudly as Denzel walked onto the set, his presence immediately demanding attention. He was wearing a sharp navy blue suit, his posture confident yet humble as he waved to the crowd. He sat down across from Joy, and the energy in the room changed noticeably. This was not just any guest. This was Denzel Washington, and everyone understood they were about to see something memorable. "Denzel, thank you so much for coming here," Joy started, her tone friendly, but with a hint that she had a hidden goal. "I have to say, your newest movie has certainly sparked many discussions. Some are calling it your most vital work yet, while others have some worries about the message you're trying to give." Denzel leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Well, Joy, I appreciate you inviting me onto the show. As for the film, I think it speaks for itself. We are sharing a story that needs to be heard about ordinary people dealing with serious difficulties in this country. If that makes some people uneasy, then maybe they need to ask themselves the reason why. But don't you think," Joy broke in, her voice taking on a more challenging sound, "that as someone with your reach and your power, you have a duty to be more, let's say, careful about the messages you're releasing? I mean, this movie of yours, it's quite critical of police work, pretty critical of our legal system. Don't you worry about the effect that might have?" The smile left Denzel's face and he sat up slightly, his eyes looking directly into Joy's. "Careful, Joy. I've been in this business for over 40 years. I've played police officers. I've played criminals. I've played heroes and villains. But this film isn't about being careful. It's about being honest. If the truth makes people uncomfortable, that's not my issue. That's theirs." Joy shifted in her seat, clearly not expecting such a quick comeback. She had interviewed many famous people over the years, most of whom were happy to give safe, practiced answers to stay away from trouble. Denzel Washington was clearly not going to be one of those guests. "Honest," she repeated, her voice full of doubt. "But whose truth are we talking about here, Denzel? Because from where I am sitting, it looks like you're pushing one specific point of view, one that paints our police officers, our legal system, in a very unfavorable light, and I have to ask, is that truly fair?" The feeling in the room seemed to get colder. Denzel's expression became serious, and when he spoke, his voice was measured, but strong. "Fair, Joy. Let me ask you something. When a young black man gets stopped for driving in the wrong area, is that fair? When a family loses their father, their son, their brother to police violence, and the officer responsible gets a paid break, is that fair? We're not talking about made-up stories here. We're talking about real life. But surely you can't lump all law enforcement together," Joy challenged, her voice getting louder. "There are excellent police officers out there, Denzel. There are officers who risk their lives every day to keep our neighborhoods safe. Don't they deserve better than to be grouped with the bad ones?" Denzel's jaw tightened, and for a moment the studio was completely silent except for the quiet sound of the cameras. "Of course, there are good officers, Joy. But that's not what we're talking about right now, is it? This is about you trying to trap me, trying to make me the angry black man who is against the police." "Well, I'm not going to play that game. I'm not trying to trap you," Joy objected, but her tone suggested otherwise. "I'm simply asking reasonable questions about the duty that comes with your public standing. You have millions of followers who admire you, who trust your judgment. When you make a movie that shows police work in such a bad way, don't you think you owe it to them and to the officers themselves to present a more balanced view?" Denzel leaned forward, his eyes never leaving Joy's face. "Let me tell you something about duty, Joy. My duty is to tell meaningful stories, to highlight problems that too many people want to keep hidden. If you want balance, watch the evening news. They'll give you plenty of stories about brave police officers. But that's not the story I'm telling, because it's not the story that most needs to be told right now." The strain in the studio was now clear, with audience members moving restlessly in their seats. The other hosts of The View sat in shocked quiet, unsure how to break into what was quickly turning into a fierce argument. Joy, however, seemed unaware of the discomfort she was causing, pushing ahead with her line of questioning. "So, you're saying that your version of the truth is the only one that counts?" she asked, her voice taking on a mocking quality. "That your point of view is more important than the points of view of the thousands of police officers who put their lives at risk every day to keep us protected?" That was the moment everything changed. Denzel's calmness, which had been strong throughout the interview, despite Joy's increasingly aggressive questions, finally broke, not in anger, but in something much more intense. Disappointment mixed with a quiet rage that was somehow more frightening than any yelling could have been. "Joy," he said, his voice so quiet that the audience had to listen hard to hear him, I think you completely misunderstand what is happening here." The words hung heavily in the air, like a thunderstorm waiting to happen. Denzel's eyes locked onto Joy, and for the first time since the interview started, she seemed to realize she might have gone too far. But instead of stepping back, she made things worse, a decision that would prove to be her biggest blunder of the day. "Oh, I understand perfectly," Joy shot back, her voice full of superiority. "I understand that you've made a career out of acting like the victim, out of pointing fingers instead of taking responsibility, and now you want to use your fame to promote some kind of anti-establishment idea. Well, I'm sorry, Denzel, but some of us live in the real world." The collective gasp from the studio audience was loud. Even the camera operators seemed to freeze, unsure if they should keep filming. This had gone far beyond a heated interview and into an area that no one was ready for. But Joy, made bolder by what she thought was having the upper hand, kept up her attack. "You sit there in your comfortable position," she continued, waving her hand dismissively, "making millions of dollars while everyday Americans, including police officers, struggle to get by and keep our communities safe. And then you have the nerve to preach to us about honesty and fairness? Give me a break?" Denzel stood up slowly, his tall figure casting a shadow over the interview table. When he spoke, his voice was steady, but there was an unmistakable firmness beneath the surface. "Joy, I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say because I'm only going to say it one time." "Oh, here we go." Joy interrupted with a nervous chuckle, looking toward the audience as if seeking their approval. "The great Denzel Washington is about to educate us poor, simple folk about how the world really is. Sit down," Denzel said quietly, his voice cutting through her sarcasm like a sharp object. For the first time, Joy seemed to grasp the seriousness of the situation. The smug expression left her face as she saw the look in Denzel's eyes. This wasn't anger. This was something much more serious. It was disappointment mixed with a quiet authority that commanded respect. "You want to talk about the real world?" Denzel continued, his voice still quiet, but loud enough to reach every part of the studio. "Let me tell you about the real world, Joy. The real world is where I grew up. In Mount Vernon, New York, where my father worked 2 jobs to put food on the table. The real world is where my mother cleaned houses for families that wouldn't even let her eat at their table." "Denzel, I didn't mean..." Joy started, but he held up a hand, silencing her. "No. You had your chance to talk. Now it's my turn." His voice was steady, measured, but there was an underlying power that made everyone in the studio hold their breath. "The real world is where young men who look like me get followed in shops, get pulled over for driving nice cars, get assumed to be criminals before they even speak. That's the real world I'm talking about in my film." Joy shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly regretting her word choices. "I understand that, but surely you can see that there are 2 sides to every story." "2 sides?" Denzel's voice rose slightly, the first sign of a break in his calm demeanor. "Joy, when a man is on the ground with a knee on his neck, gasping for air, begging for his life. What's the other side of that story? When a 12-year-old boy is shot within seconds of police arriving on the scene. What's the other side? When a woman is killed in her own bed by officers who broke into the wrong apartment. What's the other side?" The studio had become completely silent. Even the production crew had stopped moving, focused on the raw feeling in Denzel's voice. Joy, for her part, seemed to be cowering in her chair, finally realizing that she had started something she couldn't stop. "I wasn't trying to downplay those awful events," she stammered, her usual self-assurance completely gone. "But you have to admit that you're using your platform to push a very narrow view of law enforcement." Denzel laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Narrow view, Joy? Do you know what narrow view looks like? Narrow view is when officers who commit crimes get easy office work, while the families of their victims get threats of violence. Narrow view is when peaceful protesters get pepper spray while armed extremists get safely walked away. Narrow view is when people like you sit in your comfortable studios and tell people like me to be more balanced while our communities are being attacked. That's not fair." Joy objected, her voice taking on a whiny sound that only served to show how out of her depth she was. "I've always supported civil rights, supporting everyone being treated equally. I'm one of the good people here." "The good people?" Denzel repeated, his voice now carrying a note of disbelief. "Joy, you've spent the last 15 minutes trying to convince me that the stories I'm telling, the experiences of my community, are somehow unfair or prejudiced. You've brushed aside the pain and suffering of countless families as being narrow-minded, and you think that makes you one of the good people." Joy looked around the studio desperately, seeking support from her co-hosts, from the audience, from anyone. But everyone was watching Denzel, hanging on his every word. She had lost control of her own show, and everyone in the building knew it. "I think maybe we should take a break for a commercial," she suggested weakly, reaching for her earpiece to talk to the control room. "No," Denzel said firmly, his hand moving to cover the earpiece. "We're not taking a break. You started this conversation, Joy, and we are going to finish it. You wanted to talk about duty. Let's talk about your duty." The color drained from Joy's face as she realized there was no way out. She had trapped herself, and Denzel Washington was not the kind of man to let someone off the hook when they had gone too far. "You have a platform too, Joy," Denzel continued, his voice gaining power. "Millions of people watch this show every day. They trust you to ask fair questions, to treat your guests with respect, to have meaningful conversations. But instead you use your platform to surprise people, to try to score easy political points, to shame guests who don't fit into your limited worldview. I was just doing my job, Joy protested, but her voice lacked sincerity. I was asking the difficult questions that viewers want answers to. Your job. Denzel's voice rose again, and this time there was no doubt about the anger beneath the surface. Your job is to be a journalist, Joy, not a prosecutor. Your job is to inform your audience, not to humiliate your guests. Your job is to find the truth, not to push your own ideas. Joy's face had gone completely red. Whether from feeling ashamed or being angry, it was hard to tell. How dare you tell me about journalism? She snapped, her defensive side finally kicking in. I've been doing this longer than you've been making movies. I don't need some Hollywood actor telling me how to do my job. That was the final breaking point. Denzel's calmness, which had been barely holding on, finally snapped completely. The change was instantaneous and scary. The controlled, dignified man who had been trying to have a sensible discussion was gone, replaced by someone whose eyes burned with justified anger. When Denzel spoke, his voice carried the weight of every wrong he had ever seen, every insult he had ever put up with, every story he had been told by people who looked like him and had suffered silently. Some Hollywood actor, he repeated, his voice low and threatening. Joy, let me tell you something about this Hollywood actor. This Hollywood actor grew up in a world where he had to be twice as good to get half as much. This Hollywood actor has spent 40 years building a career while people like you wondered whether he deserved every part he got. This Hollywood actor has used his success to help others, to tell important stories, to bring light to dark places. Joy tried to interrupt, but Denzel held up his hand again, and this time the gesture carried such authority that she immediately went silent. But you know what really bothers me, Joy? It's not that you don't agree with me. It's not even that you're trying to misrepresent my words or twist my message. What bothers me is the lack of respect. The easy, thoughtless lack of respect that you think you can get away with, because you're sitting behind that desk and I'm just a guest on your show. The studio was so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. Even the camera operators had stopped adjusting their gear, afraid that any movement would break the effect Denzel had cast over the room. Joy sat frozen in her chair, her mouth slightly open, clearly understanding for the first time that she had pushed too far. You think because you've been on television for a few years that gives you the right to talk down to me? Denzel continued, his voice getting louder with each word. You think because you have a microphone and a camera that you can dismiss my experiences, my community, my truth as being narrow-minded or prejudiced? Denzel, please. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Joy stuttered, her voice shaking. I never meant to disrespect you. I have nothing but admiration for your work, for your career. A misunderstanding. Denzel laughed, but it was a sound without any warmth. Joy, the only misunderstanding here is your belief that you could sit across from me and question my honesty, my reasons, my right to tell the stories I want to tell, and somehow think that was acceptable behavior. Joy looked desperately toward the control booth, clearly hoping that someone would cut to a commercial or end the interview. But the producers were as focused as everyone else, watching one of the most powerful moments in television history happen before their eyes. You want to know about duty? Denzel asked, leaning forward until he was very close to Joy's face. Here is your duty. Your duty is to realize that when you invite someone onto your show, you're stepping into their space, their time, their story. Your duty is to come ready to ask intelligent questions, to have a meaningful conversation. Your duty is to treat your guests with the same respect you would want to be treated with. I do treat my guests with respect. Joy protested weakly. But even she didn't sound convinced by her own words. Do you? Denzel asked, his voice full of doubt. Is that what you call what took place here today? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you invited me on your show so you could attack me, so you could try to make me look like some kind of crazy extremist for having the courage to make a movie about real problems affecting real people. Joy's face was now bright red, and she was clearly struggling to stay calm. I wasn't trying to, I just think that when someone has a platform like yours. Stop, Denzel said firmly, cutting her off mid-sentence. Just stop. Every word that comes out of your mouth is making this worse. You're not saying sorry. You're not admitting what you did wrong. You're just making excuses and trying to justify your actions. The strain in the room was becoming too much. Several audience members had their hands over their mouths in shock while others were leaning forward in their seats, afraid to miss a single word. The other hosts of The View sat in stunned quiet, completely unable to take back control of their own show. You know what the true tragedy is here, Joy? Denzel asked, his voice becoming quiet again, which somehow made his words even more impactful. The true tragedy is that you had an opportunity today. You had an opportunity to have a serious conversation about important issues. You had an opportunity to ask thoughtful questions about art, about telling stories, about the duty we all owe to each other. But instead you chose to turn this into some kind of ambush. I was just trying to give viewers a balanced point of view, Joy said desperately, but her voice had taken on a whining quality that only served to show how completely she had been beaten. Balanced. Denzel's voice rose again, and this time there was no mistaking the anger. Joy, there is nothing balanced about ignoring the experiences of an entire community. There is nothing balanced about telling someone that their truth is biased. There is nothing balanced about using your platform to silence voices that make you uncomfortable. At that moment, something unbelievable happened. The audience, which had been silent throughout the entire argument, began to applaud. It started with just a few people, but within seconds the entire studio was standing, giving Denzel a standing ovation. Joy looked around in shock as she realized that her own audience was cheering for the man who had just completely dismantled her on live television. Cut to commercial. She hissed into her earpiece, but the applause was so loud that the control room couldn't hear her. Cut to commercial now. But Denzel wasn't finished. He stood up from his chair and looked directly into the main camera, speaking to the viewers at home with the same intensity he had been directing at Joy. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying over the applause, "this is what happens when people in powerful positions think they can silence voices that challenge their ideas. This is what happens when journalists forget that their job is to find truth, not to push personal ideas. This is what happens when respect is forgotten." Joy frantically waved to the producers, and finally, thankfully for her, two stage managers came out from behind the cameras. They approached her chair nervously, clearly uncomfortable with what they had been asked to do. "Miss Behar," one of them said quietly, "we need you to come with us." "What?" Joy's voice was high-pitched with panic. "This is my show. You can't remove me from my own show." "Mom, we have our instructions," the other stage manager said gently but firmly, taking her arm. "We need to get you off the set." The audience watched in shocked quiet as Joy Behar, the host of The View, was physically led off her own set while the cameras kept filming. Her protests could be heard echoing from backstage as she was taken away, but they only served to show how completely she had lost control of the situation. Denzel stayed standing at the interview table, his calmness fully back. He straightened his tie, looked directly into the camera one last time, and spoke with a quiet dignity that had made him one of the most respected people in entertainment. "The truth doesn't need to be balanced," he said simply. "The truth just needs to be told." The cameras finally cut away, but not before getting one final shot of the empty chair where Joy Behar had been sitting just moments before. The most explosive argument in daytime television history was finished, but the effects would be felt for years. What do you think about this amazing confrontation? Was Joy Behar totally wrong, or was she just doing her job as a journalist? Share your thoughts in the comments below and make sure you follow for more analyses of the most dramatic moments in entertainment.